Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is redo and change in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 16, Resurrected. Soul Society. Ichigo had just finished the paperwork for the day and was a little more than frustrated. Between being the Squad 11 captain, training his newest students in Rukia and Toshiro, and making sure that Las Noches is in order, Ichigo was a little more than overwhelmed. But today was a somewhat special day. Today, in the world of the living that is, was the day his mother was born. Ichigo had been keeping tabs on events within the world of the living ever since he became captain of Squad 11. Fortunately for him, there were only a few days where he would have to watch out for his mother's birth, the day Ashine would leave for her, though he would have to be very careful with that timing, and the birth of all his friends. Ichigo figured out that since he was back in time and changing many things already, he would have to force some events to happen. His own birth would have to be one of his top priorities. He knew that he couldn't harm Ashine in any way, and he couldn't make Sosuke create the hollow that attacked his mother before he was born, but he could try something else entirely. Both of his parents were madly in love with each other at first sight, so all he would have to do is force Ashine out of the Soul Society to be with her. That, and a few dozen other things as well. He remembered Shinji and the Vizards, but knew they wouldn't come back here. In his own time, they also helped in his betrayal by informing Soul Society of his growing hollow at the time. Since Ichigo has full control of the Hogyaku, his hollow was dead now. There was also the possibility with messing with this new time that many of his friends would be different. Maybe even himself. That was a risk he was willing to take to ensure these changes to the future. Ichigo sighed and stood up from his chair. He grabbed his Haori and lazily put it on as he headed out the door. He decided to take a walk around the Siriti today and just relax for now to clear his mind. True to form, his plan was still solid and ironclad, but with what's about to happen in the world of the living, he would have to really calculate every factor now. As Ichigo walked on, he had an idea come to him. He made sure that he went to a secluded area and hid his spirit energy from any prying eyes as he opened up a Garganta to the world of the living. He quickly went through it and landed on a rooftop adjacent from a hospital. The sight of a bustling city was a refreshing thing he needed. He took a deep breath of the fresh air and then looked through a window to see a woman holding her newborn daughter. The little bundle was wrapped in a pink blanket and was fast asleep in her mother's arms. Ichigo smiled as he could simply feel that he knew who this girl was. That was his mother, Masaka Kurosaki. Seeing her like this really brought the first, genuinely warm smile from the usually cold captain. He looked right at her as she opened her eyes and looked out the window to him. She smiled and started to giggle a bit, causing Ichigo to do the one thing he hadn't done in a long, long time. He shed a tear. A real one too, not a fake one they used to distract Ashine that one night after he met aka. A real one, and he wiped it away as he opened another Garganta back to Soul Society. He was now back in his room and took a deep breath as he would remember that smile for the rest of his life. Don't worry, Mom. Ichigo started to himself. This time, things are gonna be different for you. I promise. Chapter 17, Planned Paradox. Sosuke was in his lab working on a few things when he felt a Garganta open up behind him. He wasn't alarmed or even weary when two slender arms wrapped themselves around his neck and he felt a little force on the top of his head. As a matter of fact, he smiled and sighed out. Hello, Misoto. He said as he heard a little giggle behind him. Hi, Daddy. She said to him as she hugged him some more before releasing him. She walked over to his side as he looked up at her and smirked. So, what brings you to my humble abode today, Misoto? Sosuke asked his surrogate daughter with a kind smile. Misoto smiled a big-toothed smile and giggled a bit. No reason in particular, just came to tell you that the two Soul Reapers you and Lord Ko sent are integrating well in Las Noches. Sosuke nodded to his daughter. He knew that Ichigo wanted Kisuke and Yoriyuki out of the way and potentially join them through force, but Sosuke never imagined that they would start to fit in with the Eren cars. This was getting better and better by the moment. Thank you for the good news, Misoto. Sosuke said to his daughter with that same smile. Make sure to keep them under watch until Ichigo says otherwise. Okay. Misoto gave him a big smile and a surprise hug that he returned. No problem, Daddy. she said to him before letting go of him and opening a garganta. She left and went back to relay the orders to the aka Ensale. Sosuke shook his head at his daughter's playful nature. Powerful or not, she was still his little girl no matter what. He started to think just how different his life would have been if he hadn't met Ichigo all those years ago. He could have turned out so different than he is now, and in a bad way at that. His musing was cut short when Ichigo stepped into his lab with an almost glow to his usually stoic tone. Ichigo. Sosuke started as he turned in his chair and raised an eyebrow. You seem cheerful. Almost like you went and had a fun battle with Zaraki again. Ichigo shook his head at his former student and continued to smile. I met someone who has my greatest interest. A little girl in the world of the living that I will need your help monitoring for some time, Sosuke. The captain of Squad 5 nodded and leaned in his chair. Who is it? A Quincy girl just born named Masaki Kurosaki. Ichigo said to him and saw his former student go wide-eyed. Kurosaki? But, that was your dash. Sosuke was going to continue when Ichigo stopped him by raising his hand. The current Kenpeka sat down in another chair and looked right at Sosuke with that same smile and continued. I think it's about time I tell you the truth of where I came from that day, Sosuke. To say that Sosuke Aizen was surprised by those words was an understatement. He was never told just what had happened that day specifically or just where Ichigo was really from, but he knew that this conversation would change everything. Chapter 18, In Motion. It had been a few weeks since Ichigo came clean with Sosuke about everything and the captain of Squad 5 took it well. Well, not the whole power-hungry nutcase that was hell-bent on attaining power that transcends that of Hollows and Soul Reapers part. He was absolutely fascinated by the fact that Ichigo traveled through time more so than everything else really. All of the things that he was told about that future was absolutely amazing to him aside from his own self. Now, they were less than 2 mere decades away from the point Ichigo was born to start getting everything on a new set path. If what Ichigo told him was true, then he would have to figure out some sort of way to create the hollow, white, to only infect Ichigo's soul and not his mother's. Ichigo put his absolute faith and trust into Sosuke now. Ichigo was the one who changed his life completely. From showing him how to really use his power to giving him the means to have his own daughter, Sosuke would not disappoint Ichigo. Not this time. Squad 11, Training Grounds. Currently, Ichigo was training both Rukia Kukaki and Toshiro Hitsugaya, and it was going rather smoothly. This was a surprise to the current Kenpeki as the two were starting to get his training methods. Maybe it had something to do with Byakuya informing his younger sister of his former teacher's methods and Ishine, who spied on a few of those old training times himself, informing Toshiro. Either way, it was going smooth. Rukia had gotten her already fantastic control of Kido to be even better than before. Now she can do up to level 30 Kidos without the incantation, a feat that would have taken her over 3 months to learn back in Ichigo's old time after he saved her from being executed. Her swordsmanship still leaves much to be desired, but she was mainly working on speed and versatility at the moment. Toshiro was doing well. Not as well as when Ichigo briefly fought him in his own time, but still well. His Zanpakuto, while being the strongest ice type with Rukia's right behind him, was almost weightless with each strike he gave to Ichigo. He had no power to do any damage or give any force to his current teacher when they sparred, and Ichigo could tell that he would get frustrated. That frustration would be his downfall if he didn't rein in his anger real quick. His swordsmanship skills were better than Rukia's, which isn't saying much, and his own speed was above average, but his Kido skill was awful. Right now, Ichigo was preparing to duel them both at the same time with a practice sword. Now, this would be just fine, if both his current students weren't wielding their own respective Zanpakutos. Along the sidelines of the training grounds was Byakuya, Ishine and even Swyfon. They saw their teacher take out the wooden sword used for practicing and visibly paled. What the hell? Ishine muttered along. He's seriously going to use a practice sword against 2 actual swords? Man, Ichigo is either crazy or has something up his sleeve. You could say that. Byakuya said to him, earning a raised brow from the head of the Shiba clan. When he would spar against us back then when we were starting out, he would use a wooden sword and tell us to come at him with the intent to kill. Swyfon answered. Wait. What? Ishine spoke out as now both Rukia and Toshiro stared at the Squad 2 captain as they overheard her. They quickly turned to Ichigo, who was stretching his arms a bit, and saw that he had taken off his captain's Haori. The two youngest and least experienced in the area swallowed a lump in their own throat and saw the smirk on the captain's face as he placed the wooden sword on his shoulder. "Y'all heard SWAFON, so I won't repeat my own self." Ichigo started to the two as he stretched a kink out of his neck. "So, let's see what you two got." Both Rukia and Toshiro nodded hesitantly as they drew their own blades and waited for Ichigo to make the first move. Ichigo didn't bother setting his wooden sword down and instead walked over to the nervous duo casually. The two knew they stood no chance against a captain. Hell, they probably couldn't even take on a lieutenant. But it was something off about how they were being approached that really got them looking at one another. Toshiro nodded to her and she nodded back. With a sigh, Rukia decided to start a plan. "Hado number 31, Shakkeiho." She yelled out as the red ball of fire shot right at the still casual strolling captain. Ichigo narrowed his eyes as she knew that attack wouldn't do a damn thing to him. It was when the attack struck the ground right in front of him, kicking up dust, did he realize what they were planning. Ichigo smirked as these two figured out the objective rather quickly. Teamwork. Ichigo looked to his right where the dust was the heaviest and wasn't even surprised when he saw Toshiro coming at him. Ichigo dodged his swings and kept his wooden blade on his shoulder the entire time. He watched as Toshiro was indeed coming at him with the intent to kill, but he was just too slow compared to Ichigo. After a few more minutes of Toshiro's failed attempts at hitting the captain, Ichigo merely caught his blade with a finger, shocking both Toshiro and Rukia off preparing a stronger Kido, but also Ishine who thought that this was crazy. Ichigo's former students shuddered at their own experience when he did this to them all that time ago. How? Toshiro muttered out, still in shock at what he had just witnessed. Ichigo didn't answer as he did to Toshiro what Aizen did to him back in his old timeline. He lightly tapped the blade of the Zanpakuto and instead of a gash like back with Aizen, instead it was a loud smacking sound of wood to skin. Toshiro's eyes shrunk in pain as he felt like his chest had been caved in by a massive hollow's fist. The indent in his clothes next to his chest didn't help either. Ichigo let go of the Zanpakuto blade and watched as Toshiro fell to the floor, gasping for air. As he had dropped his Zanpakuto and was curled up trying desperately to breathe, Ichigo looked over to the stunned Rukia and saw her shocked reaction and how it stopped her chant for the stronger Kido. Ichigo smirked a bit and decided that this would be payback enough for what his old Rukia did to him. Faster than the girl could even comprehend, Ichigo appeared behind her, a large shadow looming over her and causing Rukia to freeze in fear. Ichigo kicked her in her back, hard. Hard enough to send her flying towards Toshiro, but not enough to cause any permanent damage. At worst, she'll have an incredibly difficult time walking around for a few weeks. As both Toshiro and Rukia were laid out on the floor in unimaginable pain, Ichigo once again placed his practice sword on his shoulder and walked over towards them. As first impressions go, that wasn't bad. Ichigo started as he walked over towards them. He stopped when he stood over them. But it wasn't good either. While I am impressed Yuto figured out the real meaning behind this part of the training much faster than my older students, you all still have much to learn. He looked over to Toshiro, who was finally able to breathe somewhat normally again. Toshiro, you have decent speed, but your stamina and strength are lacking heavily. You were nearly winded when you were striking at me, and that was when I noticed your total lack of strength. We will work on that. Why yes, Captain Ko. Toshiro stuttered out for a moment. The captain was right. He lacked power and stamina in his fighting style. Ichigo turned his attention towards Rukia who was struggling to sit up. Rukia, your Kido is impressive, but you froze up when you saw what I did to Toshiro. You're hesitant and you stood by trying a stronger Kido. This duel was about teamwork and that meant helping Toshiro for when he was attacking me, yet you didn't. Your lack of proper sword technique is your downfall there. We will work on that as well. Yes, Captain Ko. Rukia said to him as she realized he was right about that. Her sword skills were mediocre at best while her Kido was her strength. All right. Ichigo started to them. He turned to the three captains and continued. Byakuya, I want you to train Toshiro in the style I taught you in swordsmanship. Make sure that he can give some power and strength behind his attacks as well as be able to actually keep up on a constant basis. Understood, Ichigo. Byakuya answered his former teacher with pride. Byakuya went over to Toshiro and helped the boy stand up before they both left at a slow pace. Swafon, take Rukia and work on her speed and versatility. Make sure that she can use her Zanpakuto as well as her Kido and then expand upon it. I want her to be as good with her blade as you are by the end of the year. Ichigo said to his second student. Understood. She answered him before flashing over to Rukia, grabbing her in her Zanpakuto, and then flashing out of to the Squad 2 training grounds. Ichigo sighed before walking over to place the practice sword back with the others. Ishine approached him in slight confusion. I thought you were going to be training them, Ichigo. Why have Byakuya and Swafon do it? Ichigo looked over to his friend/father and gave him a quick smile. Because those two are basically the same as Swafon and Byakuya back then. Full of potential but lacking certain things. Toshiro is like how Byakuya was back then and the same with Rukia compared to Swafon. It only makes sense to allow my two former students to train my two current ones the same way I trained them. Ishine narrowed his eyes a bit. Sounds an awful lot like you're lazy to me. Ichigo gave a smirk. That too. I don't really feel like training these two the exact same way as I trained Byakuya and Swafon, so I'll just let those two do it instead. Ishine face-palmed himself at hearing how his friend was just lazy in this regards. Ichigo couldn't help but chuckle under his breath at his father's look, but right now he had something important to attend to. World of the living, night time. Ichigo had just landed on one of the buildings in Karakura town and hid his spirit energy in the process. He had to see how his mother was doing along with the wizards. If he knew them, then he also knew where they would be. Ichigo leapt from rooftop to rooftop in search of his mother's familiar yet faint energy. It was small, but filled with so much life to him. He knew that she wouldn't recognize him in the slightest, but that didn't matter to him. Just the idea of seeing her was enough to make him give a genuine smile. As he approached the home she was at, a pretty standard-sized home for 3 people, he felt a strong spirit energy near the harbor. He turned and could tell that Shinji and the wizards were having a tough time taming their hollows, but that didn't matter to him at the moment. He found the window that he could feel his mother's familiar energy in and looked through it. There he saw her sleeping form and couldn't help the smile on his face once more. She looked so innocent and safe where she was that it was practically a crime that she was forced into this life of soul reapers, hollows and quincies. Satisfied with seeing her again, Ichigo left and decided to make his way towards the spirit energy that was trying to be concealed and doing it rather poorly. Chapter 20, Phase 1. Ichigo was walking along the streets of the Sirei, ready to get this captain's meeting over with. Things were looking quite well for everything here so far. With Shinji and his crew no longer within the ranks, and Kisuke and Yoriyuki being in Las Noches, this meeting was mainly just to fill in the last 3 roles as captains. With squads 12, 7, and 9 captain-less, it was a somewhat relief that now they had candidates for the positions. As Ichigo made his way inside the room and took his usual place, he looked to the 3 candidates for 2 being familiar, the last a new face he hadn't seen in his time. The first was the one in line to becoming Squad 7 captain. Even in this time he was still a large individual. He wore his mask and had his body covered as always. The next familiar face for Squad 9 captain was none other than the blind man from before. He had his eyes closed as usual, his hair was tied up and he was, at least to Ichigo's keen eye, shaking a bit. The last was a man Ichigo had never seen before. He was a regular-looking man with short, black hair and nothing else really distinguishing about him. The head captain banged his cane down on the ground. This meeting is called to order. He looked around to the other captains present for a brief moment before taking a few extra seconds to look at Ichigo. Said man noticed this and had a feeling the old man wanted to speak with him afterwards. As you all know, not too long ago we lost 6 captains and Jinrei Kukaki stepped down as captain, bringing us down by 7. Thanks to Captain Ko recommending his once 4 students, that number was cut down to 3. He turned his attention to the 3 kneeling in the center of the room. Seijin Komamura, Kaname-tuan, and Akon, you 3 have shown the true qualities of becoming a captain in the eyes of your peers. You 3, who were recommended by a handful of captains, have proven your worth. Now, it is time for you three to join in our ranks. Just like last time, they were presented with captains' Haoris, each with their squad number on the back. Komamura with squad 7, Kaname with squad 9, and Akon with squad 12. Each of them took their respective Haoris and stood up. Now, you are captains of your respective squads. The head captain spoke before banging his cane on the floor once more. The three bowed in respect and placed their Haoris on before taking their places in line. For Ichigo, both Kaname and Komamura were standing next to him. He was able to get a good look at the two and noticed that they were still close friends. If that was the case, and since Kaname was so easy to convince in the original timeline by that Aizen, convincing him would be a little simple. Komamura would be a tad difficult, but maybe this could work in some way towards Ichigo's favor. It's not like he should punish them for following orders of the old. Kaname was betrayed and Komamura didn't really do anything to provoke Ichigo beforehand, so maybe this could work. After the meeting was over, Ichigo stayed behind to speak with the old man. He watched as his students left along with the new captains and the old ones as well before looking to Yamamoto. The old man stood up and ushered the current Kenpeiga to follow him to his barracks. As they were walking, Ichigo took the time to think of why the head captain would want to speak with him in private. No way that the old man knew of who Ichigo really was, so there was no reason for that. Could it be that he suspected Ichigo to know something on Shinji and the others' disappearance? No, that can't be it. Ichigo had ordered Sosuke and his own daughter along with AKA to handle that. So what was the real reason? The two had made it to the barracks and Ichigo stood with his arms crossed as he watched the old man sit in his chair. Captain Ko. He started after leaning back in his chair. I'm sure you are wondering why I requested your presence here. The thought had crossed my mind a bit. Ichigo answered in his usual tone. What do you think of our newest captains? He asked, causing Ichigo to raise a brow. You brought me here to ask me something you could have asked during the meeting. Ichigo started. If this is the case, then why are you concerned on my answer? The head captain opened his usually closed eyes to really look at Ichigo. Because it was your students, Aizen and Ichimaru, that recommended them. He spoke in a serious-like tone. You wouldn't happen to know why now, do you? Ichigo got the hidden meaning to this. The old man was wondering if he knew if his students were up to something they shouldn't be. If that were the case, then it was best to pander to the old man for now. All I know is that I taught them how to judge a person's potential. I had kept my eye on both Komamura and Tuan, but not Akon. Those two have potential to do great things, but if Sosuke and Jin see more in them than I do and recommended them in the first place, then I say we have nothing to worry about. Yamamoto seemed to be okay with that answer, or at the very least tolerate it. He nodded to Ichigo and ushered him to leave. As Ichigo did, something just felt off to the old man. He felt as though something monumental was bound to happen in the not-too-distant future, and he would be powerless to stop it. Shiba Compound, an hour later. Right now, Ichigo was walking past the all-too-familiar Shiba Manor, smiling as he walked on. He enjoyed being able to spend time with his father like this and his extended family to boot. Not to mention that seeing Kyokaku acting all flustered around him was an added bonus. The Shibas were an amazing group of people that valued family above all else and Ichigo liked that about them. It was nice to be able to relax from time to time whenever he was invited to these little outings of theirs. Today was another cookout, but this time with a few more clan members as well. Heh. Ichigo muttered under his breath as he saw the opened gate and the dozens, almost a solid 100, people all within the yard and around the manor enjoying each other's company. I really hope that none of this changes too much. Ichigo, said orange-haired captain turned to see both Kyokaku, Ganju, and Kaien making their way toward him. Well, more like Kyokaku while the others were carrying large crates on their backs. Kyokaku. Ichigo started to her with a smile that caused her to blush a bit. It's good to see you guys again. What's with the crates? Both Ganju and Kaien set them down and took a breath. They're decorations. Kyokaku answered him. Really? Ichigo raised a brow. For what exactly? Once a year, we have celebration of friends and family who are no longer with us. She explained with a kind smile to her face as she continued on. Those that the Shiba clan were friends with and could call brother or sister are celebrated and remembered on this day. Hey, you should attend Ichigo. Kyan suggested to him with a big grin on his face. You may not be a Shiba, but you're like family here. Yeah, you shall dash. Ganju started only to be cut off by Ishine coming towards them. Ichigo. He started as he came over with that big grin and hugged the man. Ichigo returned it in kind and the two let go for now. And here I was about to go out and get you myself. I'd love to. Ichigo answered him with a smile of his own. Though, I won't be able to stay too long. I've got a few things to take care of back at my squad. Ishine nodded and they all went inside, eager to enjoy the celebration. Hours later, Hueco Mundo. Ichigo had finally been able to leave the celebration and make his way back to his squad barracks on wobbly legs. The reason for those wobbly legs, you ask? Well, after Ichigo outdrank 5 men in a row without even looking the slightest bit tipsy, both Ishine, Kyan and Kyokaku decided to challenge him to a drinking contest. Almost 3 hours later, they finally ran out of sake and the three were passed out drunk on the floor. Ichigo was tipsy as hell and wobbly as hell, but knew that the Hogyaka would take care of it in a little while. He had tasked Zaraki and Ikeku to handle the small amount of paperwork while he passes out in his room for the night just to avoid suspicion. When he was in his room and sobered up from the Hogyaku, he placed a barrier around his room like usual and left through a garganta. He was now walking within the main hall of Las Noches with both Sosuke, Jin, Kisuke, and Yoriyuki walking alongside him. Kisuke was rather anxious to learn more about this Phase 1 that Ichigo had planned out. The very thought of something that was the starting point for the destruction of the Soul Society was enough to cause the usually calm and collected man to shiver a bit. Once they reached a wall near the back of the large room, Ichigo drew his Zanpakuto and stabbed the wall all the way to the hilt of his blade. He turned his blade 90 degrees to the right and a large door opened up for them, not surprising the four since they saw this once before. Ichigo sheathed his blade and they all went inside and the door closed behind them. I can't believe that this is under Hueco Mundo. Yoriyuki started as the floor under them lowered down to the deepest parts of the palace. Yes. Ichigo started as he turned to them. Phase 1 is a bit tricky, but in another decade or so, should be fully developed. The platform they were on reached a massive cavern that was even lower than the Minos forest and 10 times larger too. The cavern was covered in these strange, glowing white crystals that were everywhere, providing what little light there was for them. The first time that the four were shown this, they couldn't believe what they were seeing, and that was still the case. They all looked around as they continued to descend until the platform stopped. When it did, Ichigo took a deep breath and flared his spirit energy. This caused all of the crystals to change from white to red, giving the cavern a deathly look to it. Suddenly, a bright flash appeared in front of them all and what seemed to be a large, red tear appeared in front of them all. It stretched all the way to the top of the cavern all the way to the bottom and seemed to be a crack in reality to some. This was new to the four. Last time they were here simply to see the area, but now, they were seeing this. What is this? Jin asked with his eyes open wide for the first time in a long while. This Jin. Ichigo started as he finished flaring his energy and took a knee to catch his breath, surprising everyone even more that he was tired. Is Phase 1. They all looked towards the tier and could vaguely see something on the other side. It took them a bit to get a clear look, but once they did, they all went wide-eyed. On the other side of the tier, was none other than Siriti in all its glory. Check the description for the links to the author.